Welcome to the online recording of the Farm Financial Calendar, developed by the CARE Project and Julia Shanks Food Consulting and presented by Kian Dalzell of Three Maples Market Garden. The CARE Project is a nonprofit organization that works to increase the number of profitable and successful farms and food businesses in New England and the Hudson Valley. We do this through a combination of direct services, including business assistance, financing, trainings, webinars, and recordings like this one. And we also use our experience in the sector to conduct research and help others do the same. Please visit thecareproject.org for more information. This calendar was one of the tools that came from a research study that showed that successful farms are managed as businesses and that farmers want more tools to be able to be financially successful. The numbers in this presentation are fictitious and used for illustrative purposes only. As you plan and project for your own business, please use your own numbers. Today, we're going to talk about why bother for using this kind of project tool, but also just for bookkeeping in general. And then the overview of the calendar, formatting and concepts, and then some specific tasks, monitoring cash balance, comparing actual to projections, and the cost of production. And we're going to do a little bit of real world application, what it looks like on my farm. So why bother? Because bookkeeping doesn't have to be scary. When it's handled in manageable little bits on a regular basis, you get better data. With better data, you can make better business decisions and manage your cash flow better and file your taxes in a more straightforward way. We're going to pause here to make sure that you have the tool in front of you because it helps. Now we'll look at the financial calendar itself. First, part one. This is the more overview checklist side of things, and it breaks things up into the groupings are by frequency, daily, weekly or biweekly, monthly or quarterly, and annually. For smaller businesses or during slower periods, you may only need to do the things biweekly or quarterly, but during faster periods or for larger businesses, you're going to want to be looking at these as those weekly or monthly groupings. Annual stuff is always annual. Daily stuff is mostly always daily. Stuff is also broken up into operational tasks and managerial tasks. Operational tasks are things that you have to do to get the data that you need. They're usually day-to-day tasks or weekly tasks that they don't require as much mental power, but they need to be done. The managerial tasks tend to take more brain power. They're the analyzing side of things, and they're based on the data provided by the operational tasks. If you don't keep up on the operational tasks, you don't have the data you need to work on the managerial tasks. There are also numbers, little parenthetical numbers that you can see in part one. Those numbers send you to the appropriate part of part two. Part two is more detail, something that wouldn't really fit in a readable format in part one. We've got those parenthetical numbers from part one on the left-hand side. We have each task broken up, the task, the goal, the tools and data you'll need when you sit down, and then the process. Eventually, you'll probably stop looking at part two, but at first it's helpful and reassuring to have the information at your fingertips, especially with the less frequent tasks, since it takes longer to get used to things you only do quarterly. To get started, we need some data if we're going to do any data processing. Monthly cash flow projections. The CARE Project has a tool for that. You should do this now or soon, even if you're mid-year. Rough projections are better than no projections. It'll make everything work a little bit better as you go through all of the tasks that you're doing with the calendar. Having a system for tracking your revenue or sales and expenses. QuickBooks is great. It's what the CARE Project would recommend for a comprehensive and robust option, but it's doable in a spreadsheet program like Excel or OpenOffice Sheets. And there are other bookkeeping programs than QuickBooks. QuickBooks happens to be the standard and the one that we can provide the most support for. And then whatever you use for your actual calendar to remind you for other tasks in your life, you're probably going to call that into use for this as well. Let's look at monitoring cash, something you're going to be doing weekly or bi-weekly. It's going to probably make more sense to do weekly during higher sales and higher spending periods, which is something that I know is a bit of a bummer because that's when we don't have as much time for it, but it is when it's more important to make the time. You'll find it right here in that little red box, and that sends you to part 2, which gives you the details of the task. Here are those details in text that's actually readable. The goal here is to maintain a positive cash balance on your bank account, avoiding bounced checks and late fees. Tools and data you'll need when you sit down are your current bank balance, the amount of uncashed checks, list of bills due, estimates of additional expenses, estimates of cash flow coming in, the cash coming in, both of which will be found at least partially on your cash flow projections. Tools and data. Where is that stuff? Your bank balance, either looking online at your bank balance, or usually your balance in QuickBooks or your accounting software. And you want to make sure you have your check register to make sure there's nothing outstanding, or you're taking the outstanding things into account when looking at this. Your bills due, having a special place to keep all of your bills, checking your accounts payable in QuickBooks, and looking at your calendar. What's coming up? What bill is due at what point of the month? And then anticipating the cash coming in, you're also going to want those cash flow projections and the calendar so that you can see what's coming up. The process itself, we're going through your beginning balance minus all the cash outflows plus the anticipated cash inflows to get the ending balance. This breaks it up so that it's in step by step, and that's how it's going to work when you're sitting down to do it at first. Eventually, it'll make a lot of sense, and you'll be able to go through this process very quickly. When your numbers look good, it's pretty easy. Beginning balance of $4,100. You have $1,300 coming up in bills this week, $750 in other payments. You expect to make $2,500 of revenue this week. And so all together, you're looking at an ending cash balance at the end of the week of $4,550. This is good in two ways. One of them is that you have more money at the end of the week than the beginning, which is always lovely, but also the outgoing cash is less than the amount in the bank account at the beginning of the week. So you know at no point this week are you going to be right along that edge of zero in your bank account. Sometimes it's a little less pretty. Same beginning cash balance of $4,100. You have some large payments coming up, so not just your regular bills of $1,300, but also a $5,750 payment. Even with that expected cash inflow of $2,500, you're still looking at a bit of a shortfall. Now it's strategy time. Strategy does not mean writing checks and praying they're not cashed on the same day. It means figuring out if there's a way to increase the revenue for the week, pick up a market per diem, work out a deal with a local business that pays cash, something to that effect, or shifting something to next week or to a couple of weeks from now without incurring fees, ideally. Sometimes there are invoices that might say that you can get a discount if you pay them early and you plan to pay them early. Maybe not paying them early this time around is a good plan. And if these things aren't possible, then talking to your bank, accessing a line of credit, or taking out a short-term loan to bridge that gap. If all else fails, you may be able to borrow from yourself or from somebody else, but realistically, we really want to be looking at your farm's finances being your farm's finances and not going the personal loan route for you or anyone else to the farm if you don't have to. Your projections and looking at this regularly is going to give you the time that you need to be able to have those conversations with the bank and get access to that line of credit or to that small short-term loan without having the added stress of needing to have it happen right away. Now let's look at comparing actuals to projections. It's a monthly managerial task, numbers 5 and 6. And then we can look at the detailed version of that, 5 and 6 here. That's a lot of bullet points, but a lot of those overlap, so it won't be too complicated. The goal here is to keep on track with profit targets. The tools and data you're going to need are your cash flow projections, your complete sales report and expense report, and we want to see those things in Excel if possible. So export it to Excel or to a spreadsheet if you're using QuickBooks or another accounting software. Your cash flow projections are in the Carrot Projects tool from the website. you're going to be pulling a sales report from QuickBooks Profit and Loss or an Excel spreadsheet that you've been tracking sales in. Same thing with expenses, QuickBooks Profit and Loss, or the Excel spreadsheet that you've been tracking things in. And for this, we ideally want to look at both dollar amount and percentage of sales, which is one of the reasons that we want to look at it all in Excel. If you use QuickBooks, especially with the budget tool, you'll be able to run a report and look at projections versus budget. Or projections, which they call budget, versus actuals. You can see them in terms of over and under, both in dollar and percentage, and it tends to look like this. The percentage here is really helpful because you can see it more easily in relation, each of the lines in relation to the others. So in this example, the sales are 14% over budget, which is awesome. Cost of goods is also over, but only by 4%. So it's a much smaller increase than the sales are. So you're seeing that as something to be it's a good thing to have that increase. You bought more in, but you sold significantly more than the amount more that you bought in. If you're looking in Excel, it might look a little bit more like this. In this example, there was an unanticipated car repair or a projected car repair, but since the month wasn't known, it was spread out over the year, and this crisis month happened. That line is well over budget, but knowing it would be an issue, the farmers tried to delay purchases, rebalance the month. They did an admirable job. The impact is much less. They delayed a lot of other purchases to try to keep as much cash as possible in the bank account, but they didn't quite make it. Their expenses are still over budget for the month, and they're still looking at that as a negative 19% for where they wanted to be. Now we're going to look at reviewing your pricing structure, which is something that you really want to look at annually. Annually means we're going to be looking over on the right-hand side and finding number 10. Usually, this means that you'll be looking at both your cost of production and what your competition charges. Today, we're only going to be looking at your cost of production, and we're going to do it in a simplified manner. Yours is probably going to be more complicated and take a little longer because you have a real business and not an illustrative purposes example. If you have any questions as you're going through this process or hit a snag, contact the Carrot Project and we may be able to help you through. So this sends us to number 10, reviewing pricing structure. We find that here, our goal here is to understand the true costs for your farm to better price products and for better profitability, and to know which products are most profitable so you can focus on them in the future. The tools you're looking for are your production tracking worksheets, the sales, invoicing, the labor tracking worksheets, whatever you're doing to make sure that you're keeping track of that stuff, and your direct expenses. Notice that on the production, sales, labor, and expenses, they're all daily operational tasks. Dedication to the boring data entry is really going to make a difference when it comes to sitting down and doing these big annual tasks. So we're going to be looking at all of your data kind of all at once. You're sitting down once a year with all of your spreadsheets spread out in front of you. Part of this is the labor and production tracking. That's over here. Just to quell some fears, we don't expect you to track everything every year. For a diverse operation, either in terms of varieties produced or multiple enterprises, it's important to build data over time. So don't get lost tracking everything. Focus on what you sell the most of at first and work your way through each of those things over time. Let's look at an example with hens. We can see at the bottom here that she tracked egg sales because the ones that sell have to cover the cost of all of the ones that produced. We also see that she tracked her labor. Even if you're not paying yourself or paying yourself per hour or not paying yourself this much per hour, there's value in your labor and you really need to account for it. That way, when you hire labor, you'll have priced your product properly and planned for it. And also, if you break your leg tomorrow, you're going to have to pay someone to take care of those chickens. You have to consider what it costs to pay your replacement in case one is needed. So now we have seasonal totals for everything, and we can break them down per dozen. And we can see that her cost of production per dozen is $4.35. It's worth noting that she hasn't paid her overhead yet. So when she's doing this, she needs to know that information as well and make sure she's getting her prices high enough to cover those costs as well as the cost of production. Now let's look at what it looks like a little bit messier, because the tool provides an ideal scenario. Like most ideal scenarios, it doesn't look like that on my farm, or at least at first on most people's. I never expect really to get to the ideal scenario, but every year that I'm using the tool and really looking at that data, I'm getting closer. So I'm starting my 11th season. The first few years were kind of a panic of numbers around tax time, and I hadn't really learned how to manage my business finances in any way. So we're getting there. But every year is better. I do 2 to 3 acres in production based in a CSA and a farm stand. And we do vegetables, although we also have flowers and some herbs. When I'm sitting down to do this, things tend to be on the wider end, so bi-weekly tasks instead of weekly ones, and quarterly tasks instead of monthly ones, although increasingly I'm really looking at my monthly to quarterly tasks on a monthly basis. I find that it helps me keep on top of everything. But generally speaking, I'm a small scale business, especially as a CSA. A lot of my costs as well as my income is kind of pushed into a smaller section. So it makes it easier to not have to look at as much each week. And weekly assessments take fairly little time for that reason. A few purchases, a deposit or two. I don't have employees at this point, so there's no payroll to deal with. Annual stuff, of course, is still annual. In terms of my process, the managerial tasks tend to be assigned to one person. With my business, that's me, but operational tasks are whoever's doing them. On annual basis, especially when we're doing those managerial tasks of talking through the profit and loss statement for the year, when we're looking at our pricing structure, when we're reviewing our business plan, everyone who's a decision maker needs to be involved. And in my business, that's myself and my wife, and eventually our children. It's especially true with pricing structure. We can engage in this a lot easier since most of our sales are a CSA. We can do this kind of stuff during the winter and with the website, because most people will put information about their CSA up during the winter on their websites. Since we have a farm stand, we're also doing a little bit of this data entry during the year. Anytime I go into a grocery store, I'll take pictures in the produce department, and I won't even put in the data at that point, but I'll basically cache the pictures in a particular file folder, and then I'll go back to them so that I can see that in August, one of the local box grocery stores, the supermarkets, was selling organic peppers for $8 a pound or whatever, so that I can look at those numbers when I have the time to look at them. Also, business planning is something that we tend to amend every year. It's a great midwinter task for vegetable growers, but realistically, we don't do a full overhaul every year. It would take too much time, and unless we're changing the direction of the business, it's usually not necessary. We usually do kind of an addendum each year, and then every few years there's a bit of an overhaul. So when does this happen? The writing things down has to happen pretty regularly. For me, it's usually every day or two. A farmer I know writes things down at lunch and dinner every day. For me, every time money is exchanged, it needs to be written down. I can't trust that I'm going to remember that later. It's got to be written down right away every time. And to facilitate that, we have clipboards and notebooks in the greenhouse, the wash station, and the car, the places where I'm going to be when these things are happening. Periodically, those that are collected and the information is input into the computer. Overscheduling time is something that has been really important in making sure I have enough time. Things do go awry, they always do, and so I've learned I have to plan for it, or else I don't have enough time to do all the things that I need. And also, don't wait for rainy days. I schedule mine every Friday at the same time. It's after my kid's bedtime, so that I know that there's a pretty good chance I can do it then, and I have a backup time on Saturday if I need to. I do the same thing for my seeding. It's always scheduled for Monday, and that way, if there's an issue, I have this idea that there's this block of time that was supposed to happen Monday, and I have to make sure that it happens, usually Wednesday. So this is what it actually looks like for me. I use Google Calendar both because it's easy for me and because I share it with my wife. So we'll be able to build calendars together. We have things that are recurring. Those go every week all the time. This is a mock-up, so it's a bit cleaner than they really are. So the dark green tasks are weekly farm tasks, seeding or harvest prep times that are basically the same every week. The purple ones are office time. Sunday is the planning for the week. Friday is the weekly block that allows weekly and bi-weekly tasks to happen. And then the Saturday block is the monthly block of time or quarterly block of time. And that's something that is kind of the backup for Friday if Friday doesn't work. Sunday meetings tend to lead to other things being put into place. And this one, yellow, is when I'm primary parent and I'm the one who's going to get less farm stuff done because I've got to keep an eye on the kids. Dinner and bedtime might be in there. Doesn't actually happen every night, but this is an ideal mock-up. And then all the other farm tasks I fill in after they're done. It usually takes a couple of minutes a day about how much time did I spend on what tasks when during the day. And because I do some consulting in the winter, I've gotten used to tracking my time this way. And it's really helpful to be able to look back. I end up putting this into spreadsheets later, but in an ongoing way, especially during the growing season, using the calendar like this is so much more helpful to me and works better and makes more sense to me than trying to keep track of it. In terms of the analog versus digital, I tend to be analog. My mobile office in my car has a stenographer's notebook, which lets me track gas and mileage, farm stand sales, and notes about the farm stand because it's always in my car. Same thing with the stuff that's in my glove box. There's usually a backup notebook and invoice book so that I always have one in case there's an issue with my invoice or I've dropped my notebook somewhere. And then money bag, the unsorted stuff, and I have another one for receipts in the clear bag. And then when it's ready to be deposited and sorted, it ends up in the not clear bag. A note on that bag, I have it because it's pretty. It doesn't look like the kind you get from the bank, and your tellers may try to steal it. So don't put it in the overnight bank deposit box. Make sure that they give it back to you if you're going to the bank. For your legit office space, should you have one, and you should have one if you can, I had to figure out what was going to work during the slow season and then adjust it as I went when I was actually in the middle of the growing season. Generally speaking, everything needed a place to go. The tools needed to work for me, my office, my rules. Didn't necessarily have to make sense to anybody else except my business partner. Mine happens to be the farm office and our household management space, and now part of homeschooling. So it's a little bit contained chaos. This is a clean day. And it's got a spot for everything, even to the point where I have clipped things to the lamp that are ready to be mailed because I could not find a space where I would not forget to mail things. It's a bit of a work in progress, but this is what has worked for me for a few years. And as things adjust, we just shift where stuff needs to be for that period of time. Most of my records are analog, including paying bills. This, again, is a mock-up. It's not actually my my information. And then I digitize them every so often, but having the paper version has been really useful because when I stopped using paper, I missed a couple of payments. I missed dates and paid them late and then had to pay late fees. So I found that using just the digital didn't work for me. So I have this actual paper spreadsheet and my farm calendar tool in the same folder. So when I go to pay my bills a couple of times a month, and I'm looking at that information, it's all right there. And then the rest of the stuff that I work on tends to look like templates from the Carrot Project. I work hard enough. Somebody else figured this stuff out for me. I'm going to let them do that, and I'm going to use the templates. And then after I get really used to them, I'm one of those people that tends to tool with them, so I tend to make adjustments after I've gotten comfortable with the template. So in terms of my journey and what I hope will be your journey in terms of bookkeeping, I've learned that striving for excellence motivates you and striving for perfection is demoralizing. It's Dr. Harriet Breaker. It's wonderful words of wisdom because we will never get to be perfect. I have yet to meet someone whose books are perfect, but every year mine get better. And most of the other people that I know, especially farmers, are learning this. We didn't learn this initially. So this is something that we have to increase our comfort over time. It's a long-term process. And you can't expect everything to happen in 1 year. I've also learned to write the names of the people that I can ask for guidance on my calendar and keep it in my workspace. The names on my calendar are actually some people that I participated in a Carrot Project workshop with as a participant. And some of them have even contacted me over time also. We will text or email back and forth when we have questions. Now I think we all use QuickBooks, but at first we were all using spreadsheets. If you have any questions as you go through this process, please stay in touch. You can go to thecarrotproject.org or contact Jeff Cole. And there are more resources available at thefarmersoffice.com. And you can email Julia Shanks, who is one of the people who originally created the tool and a version of this video. Thank you.